What if the air around you was never just air? What if every shadow carried intention? What if the creak of wood at night meant more than temperature and age? What if illness was not random, but sent? What if survival depended less on strength and more on what you believed? You imagine the Dark Ages as ignorance, as emptiness, as silence. But the world you are about to enter is not empty at all. It is dense, heavy, thick with meaning. And by the end of this journey, you will understand that living with superstition was not irrational weakness. It was infrastructure. You are standing in an English village sometime between the 9th and 11th century. The air is damp, not poetically damp, cold, invasive, bone-reaching damp. The soil beneath your boots is soft and uneven, churned by livestock and bare feet. It smells of earth, smoke, and animals, because animals are not separate from you. They are survival. The houses around you are not buildings in the modern sense. They are low, timber-framed structures packed with wattle and daub, woven branches coated in mud and straw. The walls sweat when it rains. The roofs are thatched, thick with reeds that rustle even when the wind is gentle. At night, that rustle will sound like whispers. Inside, light does not fill space. It flickers. Fire is the only reliable source of illumination, and it burns in a central hearth without a chimney. Smoke gathers in the rafters before slowly leaking out through thatch. Your eyes sting. Your lungs adjust. The smell of soot becomes normal. Darkness is not the absence of light. It is a presence. When the sun drops below the horizon, the village contracts. Movement slows. Doors are secured not with complex locks, but with wooden beams and faith. Outside, the world expands into something unmeasurable. There are no street lamps, no distant hum of electricity, only wind across open fields and the occasional cry of an animal you cannot see. And when you cannot see, you interpret. A cracked beam is not just aging wood. It might be a warning. A sudden fever is not bacteria. It might be punishment. A failed harvest is not climate variability. It might be divine displeasure. This is not foolishness. It is pattern recognition in an environment where data is scarce and consequences are lethal. You wake before sunrise because agriculture does not negotiate. The cold presses against your skin as you step onto hardened ground. Frost clings to thatch. Breath leaves your mouth in visible clouds. The rhythm of life is tied to light, and light is limited. Fields stretch beyond the village in narrow strips, open field farming. No fences divide them cleanly. Land is shared in a system that demands cooperation. If one family neglects timing, everyone feels it. If one crop fails, hunger ripples outward. Superstition enters here not as fantasy, but as coordination. Before planting, blessings are spoken, not quietly, publicly. Words matter because words align expectation. If everyone believes the field is protected, everyone works with more certainty. Confidence becomes productivity. Productivity becomes survival. You run your fingers through soil. It is gritty, cold, slightly damp. You do not know about nitrogen cycles or microbial ecosystems, but you know that last year's blight followed a night when an owl circled too long above the barn. So you remember the owl. Memory in a fragile society becomes rule. Inside homes, small objects hang above doorways. Bundles of herbs, carved symbols, bits of iron. Iron is not decoration. It is defense. Against what? Against what cannot be explained but must be controlled. Illness spreads quickly in tight quarters shared with animals. Without microscopes, cause is invisible, but action must still be taken. You hang iron. Children are taught gestures before they are taught letters. Touch wood. Avoid stepping over certain thresholds. Never leave milk uncovered at night. These customs are not optional. They are woven into muscle memory. Because in a world where one infection can erase a family line, prevention, even symbolic prevention, is power. The church stands slightly elevated from the rest of the village, stone, not timber, heavier, colder, more permanent. Its presence anchors everything else. Bells regulate time more reliably than any clock. When they ring, you move. Religion and superstition are not separate categories here. They overlap, reinforce, and stabilize. Official doctrine explains salvation. Local custom explains survival between Sundays. You kneel on cold stone floors. The chill seeps through fabric. Candles flicker against rough walls. The air smells of wax and damp limestone. Latin words echo, even if you do not fully understand them. Understanding is less important than repetition. Repetition creates order. Order creates calm. Outside, uncertainty remains constant. Raids are not myth. Disease is not rare. Winters are not mild. Stability is thin. And so meaning must be thick. When a cow stops producing milk, it is not simply livestock management. It is investigation. Who visited recently? Was envy present? Did someone look too long at your field? Suspicion is not paranoia. It is an attempt to trace causality in a system with too many variables and too little knowledge. You live in proximity, to animals, to neighbors, to death. There is no abstraction layer. If someone dies, the body remains in the house until burial. You see it, you smell it. Mortality is not hidden behind hospital curtains. It sits beside the hearth. So you develop rituals, coins on eyelids, specific prayers. Windows opened briefly to let the soul pass. Whether or not the soul requires ventilation is not the point. The act gives structure to grief. Structure prevents panic. Panic destabilizes communities already balanced on scarcity. Even sound carries interpretation. Wind against thatch can signal a coming storm or something wandering. Dogs barking at nothing are not ignored. Nothing is rarely nothing. At night, lying on straw bedding, you listen. The house settles with small pops as embers fade. Someone coughs. An animal shifts. Your heart beats louder in darkness. Imagination is not indulgence. It is rehearsal. If danger comes, you must already have a narrative ready. Because narrative reduces chaos. You do not separate the physical from the symbolic. They are fused. The charm above the doorway does not replace practical action. It complements it. You still secure livestock. You still mend fences. But you also whisper protection into the wood grain. To live here is to layer defenses, physical, social, spiritual. And slowly, you begin to see that superstition is not about magic. It is about margin, the small psychological buffer between stability and collapse, the thin membrane that allows you to sleep when winter stores are low. By the end of this documentary, you will understand that these customs were not relics of ignorance. They were adaptive responses to vulnerability. They were systems built without laboratories, without textbooks, without safety nets. They were what stood between order and fear. And if you are beginning to see this world differently already, pause for a moment. Confira se já é inscrito neste canal, porque aqui você descobre como o passado revela verdades que mudam a forma como você enxerga o presente. Because this is only the outer layer. Beyond the damp air, beyond the flickering firelight, beyond the iron nailed above wooden doors, there are deeper structures still, unwritten rules that governed every gesture, every birth, every death. And you are about to step into them. If no one wrote the rules, how did everyone know them? If there was no printed manual, why did, if a gesture seemed, if protection was invisible, and if you were born into it, would you wake again before the sun, but this time your attention shifts from the air to the behavior inside it. Because surviving in this village is not only about enduring cold or famine, it is about knowing no parchment lists them, no decree announces them, yet everyone feels them. You do not greet a neighbor without intention. Words are brief, but tone matters. A pause too long can suggest resentment. Eye contact held too firmly can suggest challenge. In a settlement, this small custom regulates when bread is baked. If a child falls ill the next week, you learn because childbirth here is danger. You feel the heat of the room. After birth, rituals continue. The infant. Death follows, mirrors may be covered. Clocks, if present. Stopped. The body washed by familiar hands. You participate not because you are unafraid, but because participation structures fear. Grief without ritual can fracture a household. Ritual binds it. Even you do not begin eating before the eldest present. You do not waste salt. Salt is preservation. Preservation is survival. Spilling it is not clumsiness, it is omen. If it falls, you throw a pinch over these motions accumulate. They shape posture, they dictate pacing, they build a lattice of predictability in a world that offers very little. Outside the home, fields demand similar obedience to tradition. Planting is tied to phases of the moon, not because lunar gravity is scientifically charted for agriculture, but because observation over generations suggested patterns. Correlation becomes belief. Belief becomes calendar. You look upward often. The sky is information. A halo around the moon signals coming weather shifts. A red sunrise warns of storm. These interpretations are not mystical indulgences. They are survival heuristics passed orally. Accuracy is uneven, but ignoring them feels irresponsible. Animals are watched closely. If livestock grow restless without visible cause, you do not dismiss it. You reinforce enclosures. You recite protective words. Because if wolves come and you did nothing, inaction becomes guilt. Guilt becomes suspicion. Suspicion in a fragile ecosystem is dangerous. There are also days marked for restraint. Certain dates discourage travel, others forbid starting construction. You may not understand the origin of each prohibition, but you understand the consequence of defying it. Social isolation. And isolation here is risk. If your roof collapses in winter, you need neighbors. If illness spreads, you need assistance. Reputation is insurance. Customs are premium payments. Even clothing follows invisible law. Colors signal status. Fabrics indicate occupation. Excess display invites envy. Envy invites scrutiny. Scrutiny invites stories. Stories solidify quickly. If someone repeatedly experiences misfortune, patterns are drawn. Perhaps they ignored a warning. Perhaps they offended a neighbor. Perhaps they failed to observe a ritual correctly. These narratives restore logic to randomness. You begin to see that superstition is not chaotic belief. It is communal agreement about causality. Children absorb it before language fully forms. They mimic gestures, repeat phrases, internalize boundaries. By adulthood, questioning them feels like questioning gravity. And yet, beneath compliance, there is tension. Because not all customs protect equally. Some restrict, some suffocate. A widow may be expected to mourn visibly for extended periods. A family marked by repeated illness may find invitations fewer. Protection can quietly become exclusion. Still, most follow the rules, because the alternative is exposure. When thunder rolls across open fields, you cross yourself. When a black cat darts across your path, you adjust direction. When a neighbor compliments your harvest too enthusiastically, you deflect modestly, to avoid attracting envy that could transform into whispered accusation. You manage perception constantly. And now pause. Look at the density of this system. No bureaucracy, no printed code. Yet behavior is regulated with remarkable precision. Superstition and custom function as invisible architecture, distributing responsibility across every member of the village. Without them, fear would scatter in every direction. With them, fear is channeled. If you can feel how tight this structure is, how every gesture reinforces belonging, then say it with me in the comments. I would not survive without their rules. Write exactly that, because acknowledging it changes how you see them, and we are only halfway down. In the next layer, you will confront something deeper, how fear itself became infrastructure, shaping judgment, punishment, and power. And once you see that, the village will never look simple again. What if fear was not weakness, but engineering? What if anxiety held the village together more tightly than trust? What if judgment was less about justice and more about stability? What if punishment prevented collapse? And what if you participated in it willingly? By now you feel the rhythm of the village. You understand its air, its gestures, its invisible codes. But beneath all of it lies something heavier, something structural. Fear. Not loud fear, not constant screaming panic. A quieter form, persistent, functional, distributed. You step into the open field at dawn and see mist rising low over the crops. Moisture clings to barley heads. Beautiful, yes, but also dangerous. Too much damp invites rot. Too little rain invites famine. And famine does not remain abstract, it alters behavior. When harvests shrink, suspicion grows. You gather at the edge of the field, hands calloused, backs stiff. Yield is measured not by numbers on paper, but by weight in your palms. If it feels lighter than last year, explanation becomes urgent. Was it weather? Was it soil fatigue? Or was it someone? In a society without agricultural science, causality must still exist. And when nature feels unpredictable, human intention becomes a convenient anchor. You notice who quarreled recently. You remember who seemed resentful. Patterns assemble themselves. No formal accusation yet. Just tension. Just watchfulness. This is how fear organizes space. The church bell rings, deep and metallic, carrying across damp air. You gather not only for prayer, but for alignment. Authority does not rely solely on scripture. It relies on reinforcing shared interpretation. If misfortune strikes repeatedly, leaders, both religious and local, must respond. Not responding signals weakness. Weakness spreads instability. So explanations are offered: sin, neglect, improper observance, sometimes darker suggestions. You feel it in the silence between words. The weight of collective attention turning toward an individual. A woman who lives alone. A man who mutters to himself. A family that keeps slightly apart. Fear needs outlet. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Accusation can feel like relief. It compresses diffuse anxiety into a single target. It transforms environmental uncertainty into human narrative. You stand among neighbors during informal hearings, no dramatic courtroom. Just a circle, eyes assessing, voices steady but edged. Questions framed not as attacks but as clarifications. Why were you near the livestock before they fell ill? Why did your herbs differ from others? Why did you not attend the last gathering? Each question tightens the weave. If the accused complies, shows humility, accepts correction, tension may dissipate. Social reintegration is possible. But resistance escalates perception of threat. Punishment, when it occurs, is rarely theatrical cruelty. It is corrective visibility, public apology, temporary exclusion, reaffirmation of norms, because the goal is not destruction, it is containment. You begin to see that fear functions like mortar between stones. Without it, individual desires might fracture cooperation. With it, conformity increases. Even architecture reflects this psychology. Homes cluster close. Fields are open, exposed. The church elevated. Physical layout mirrors social hierarchy. Visibility discourages deviation. You are rarely alone in public space. Night, however, changes that. In darkness, imagination amplifies. Stories circulate, of spirits, of curses, of wandering forces. Whether literal belief or metaphor, they reinforce caution. Do not stray. Do not isolate yourself. Do not defy pattern. Because outside the collective gaze, vulnerability multiplies. You lie awake again, listening to distant wind, and you realize something unsettling. Fear here is not chaotic. It is curated. Children are taught which dangers matter. Adults model which responses are acceptable. Excess panic is discouraged. Controlled vigilance is praised. If wolves attack, you reinforce fences. If illness spreads, you increase prayer and hygiene rituals. If crops fail, you review observances. Every threat triggers communal adjustment. This adaptability is strength, but it carries cost. Innovation becomes risky. Questioning tradition feels like destabilizing a fragile bridge while everyone stands on it. So experimentation slows, progress hesitates, security competes with growth. You feel this tension when someone proposes change, a new planting technique, a different boundary arrangement, an unfamiliar remedy. The idea might hold promise, but promise is not certainty. And certainty is valued more than possibility, because survival margins are thin. And yet, consider the alternative. Remove fear entirely. Remove caution. Remove collective enforcement. What happens when one household hoards grain? When one farmer ignores rotation timing? When one healer refuses shared practices? Fragmentation. Fear, then, becomes adhesive. If you can now see how anxiety, suspicion, ritual and authority form a coordinated system, not random superstition but behavioral engineering, then let that recognition settle. And if this deeper layer is reshaping how you see history, take a moment to support this journey. Click the like button so more people can uncover how fear once built entire societies. Because we are about to enter the most delicate layer yet, the moment when protection slowly transforms into confinement. And when that happens, stability begins to tremble from within. When does safety begin to suffocate? When does unity become surveillance? When does protection quietly erase choice? When does obedience stop feeling voluntary? And if you had lived here long enough, would you notice the shift? You already understand the architecture of belief. You feel how air, gesture, and fear interlock. But now you begin to sense friction, because systems built for survival do not remain neutral. They expand, they harden. You walk through the village at midday. Smoke rises in pale columns. Children chase each other between low doorways. A woman beats cloth against a wooden board near the stream. Everything appears stable, rhythmic, ordered. But listen more closely. Conversations pause when certain names are spoken. Laughter softens when elders pass. You notice how often people look to one another before answering simple questions. Approval has become reflex. Protection has weight. The same customs that once reduced chaos now regulate identity. You are not only expected to follow ritual, you are expected to embody it, to display belief outwardly. Doubt is not internal reflection, it is social risk. You feel it most strongly during seasonal festivals. What once felt communal now feels mandatory. Participation is observed, absence is noted. Songs are sung not only to celebrate harvest, but to reaffirm allegiance to shared meaning. If your voice lacks conviction, someone will remember. Memory here is long, and as generations pass, explanations for customs grow thinner, while enforcement grows firmer. The original practical purpose of a ritual may fade, yet abandoning it seems dangerous precisely because it is old. Age equals authority. A young farmer suggests adjusting planting patterns after observing soil differences. The idea is logical, but logic competes with tradition. Tradition carries emotional investment. Elders hesitate, not because change is impossible, but because deviation threatens cohesion. Cohesion is sacred. You begin to see small acts of self-censorship. A woman who questions a burial rite keeps silent. A man who doubts an omen performs the gesture anyway, not from conviction, but from caution. Compliance becomes easier than conflict. Inside homes, private thoughts remain unspoken. Outside, public identity remains consistent. This duality is subtle, but it accumulates. Protection narrows possibility. If someone repeatedly experiences misfortune, scrutiny intensifies faster than before. Where once suspicion sought restoration, now it sometimes seeks control. Exclusion becomes longer. Re-entry becomes harder. Fear shifts from communal defense to boundary policing. You notice architecture again. Doors remain low, requiring a bow to enter. Originally practical for heat retention, perhaps, but symbolically reinforcing humility. The church still towers slightly above, stone unchanged, authority steady. And you wonder, at what point did adaptation become rigidity? Winter arrives harsher than expected. Food stores thin earlier than planned. Anxiety sharpens. In such moments, systems reveal their true character. Does the community redistribute equitably? Or does hierarchy determine survival? You watch distribution carefully. Those in favor receive subtle priority. Those who once challenged custom wait longer. Protection rewards conformity. You feel gratitude for belonging and pressure to maintain it. Even marriage follows narrowing lines. Alliances are strategic. Love, if it exists, must align with expectation. Crossing boundaries, geographic or social, invites resistance. Outsiders carry unfamiliar customs. Unfamiliar customs threaten uniformity. Uniformity feels safe, but safety has a ceiling. A healer experiments quietly with different herb combinations after noticing patterns in recurring fevers. She does not announce it. She cannot risk appearing to reject established remedies. Innovation survives only in shadow. And this is the paradox. The very structure that preserved life now constrains improvement. Stability slows evolution. Fear, once mortar, begins to calcify. Yet from inside the system, it does not feel oppressive. It feels necessary. That is what makes it powerful. You sit by the hearth again, older now in this imagined life. The firelight flickers against wooden beams blackened by decades of smoke. You trace the grain of the table with your fingers. Generations have done the same. You understand why they built it this way, why they clung to ritual, why deviation frightened them, because collapse was always close. And yet you also see the cost, the narrowing of possibility, the quiet sacrifices of curiosity, the invisible walls built not of stone, but of expectation. If this tension between safety and confinement resonates with you, share this story. Share it with someone who believes the past was simple, because it was not simple, it was structured. And that structure shaped everything. And now we step into the final layer. Not the fields, not the rules, not the fear, but the meaning beneath it all. What survival truly demanded, and what it still demands from you today. What does it truly mean to survive? Is survival only about breathing another day? Or is it about preserving order in the face of chaos? If fear built their world, what builds yours? And are you so certain you live differently? You have walked through damp air and narrow doorways. You have felt the rhythm of bells and the weight of unspoken rules. You have seen fear operate not as hysteria, but as engineering. Now you stand at the edge of the village once more, looking back. Nothing here was accidental. Superstition was not random imagination. It was a framework constructed in the absence of microscopes, meteorology, and modern law. It translated uncertainty into action. It gave people something to do when they could not control outcomes. And action, even symbolic action, prevents paralysis. When crops failed, rituals organized response. When illness spread, gestures structured hope. When death arrived, ceremony prevented psychological collapse. Each custom functioned like scaffolding around a fragile structure called community. Remove the scaffolding too early, and everything risks falling. You realize that survival in the Dark Ages was not simply endurance against nature. It was endurance against meaninglessness. Without explanation, suffering multiplies. With explanation, even imperfect explanation, suffering becomes narratable. Narrative is stabilization. You look again at the fields, at the church, at the clustered homes. You understand now that their world was not governed by ignorance, but by necessity. Knowledge was limited, tools were basic, data was scarce. But the need for cohesion was immense, so they built cohesion out of belief. Yes, some customs restricted growth. Yes, fear sometimes hardened into injustice. But within their constraints, these systems kept villages functioning for generations. They coordinated labor, preserved food, regulated conflict, and offered emotional containment in the face of constant vulnerability. The fragility you sensed in the beginning was real. A harsh winter, a violent raid, a spreading fever. Any of these could dismantle everything. And yet, most villages endured. Because survival is not only physical resilience, it is collective alignment. Now, shift your perspective. Modern life feels rational, measured, secured by science. But look closer. You still create rituals. You still seek patterns in uncertainty. You still rely on shared narratives to stabilize fear. Different tools, same need. The Dark Ages were not dark because people believed in omens. They were dark because resources were thin and margins were narrow. Belief was light, flickering, imperfect, but present. And perhaps the most important realization is this: you would not have lived differently. You would have followed the customs. You would have whispered the protections. You would have feared isolation more than error, because belonging meant survival. Understanding this does not romanticize the past. It humanizes it. It dissolves the easy judgment that comes from distance. If walking through this village changed the way you see history, then check if you are subscribed to this channel, because here we uncover the structures beneath the surface of every era, and reflect for a moment on how fear still shapes the systems around you. Se você assistiu até aqui é porque gostou desse caso. Deixe um comentário dizendo "Eu assisti até aqui", para que eu possa te conhecer e saber quem realmente gosta das histórias aqui do canal. Click like so more people can question what they assume about the past. Share this documentary with someone who believes superstition was stupidity, not strategy. Because what it took to live with superstitions and customs in the Dark Ages was not blindness. It was adaptation. And adaptation is something you are still doing now, whether you notice it or not.